Hey, how y'all doing? This is Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about cultural vandalism. This is part 2. This is where we're going to talk about cultural vandalism in the real world. Essentially, to catch up people who probably didn't listen to part 1, we're talking about cultural pillars, different things that are very important to people in society and sometimes important to the society itself, has been under attack and just been tagged and destroyed or defamed by individuals who have a specific agenda in society. And it's about the twisting and manipulating of things that is usually a good, even to a certain degree, obviously, because there are very few things that are, horribly evil. Most things have good and bad to them. And what we're dealing with is usually the overindulgence and saying how bad a thing is. So I'm going to start from the beginning. How we were told in a lot of societies how things begin, and things begin with what you believe. And so the attack on religion in our modern society has been absolutely incredible. Now, as a person who is more agnostic than a believer, I can say completely from the beginning, I kind of helped in this. Like, I've always been sort of anti-theist since I was like 20 years old. I kind of grew out of it, though, and kind of saw some of the use of it. So I'm now more of agnostic. But, we've seen over the last few decades the elimination of prayer in school. Of course, most of these things are just towards Christians, because Muslims who also participate in some of these things, they don't really get bothered. Like, I've never heard of a Muslim orphanage being forced to into gay adoptions, but I've heard of Catholics being forced into gay adoptions. The bake the cake situation, where you had a Catholic man or a Christian man who is being forced to make gay wedding cakes. They're trying to bankrupt this guy because of his beliefs, and the courts allow it. This is really harassment. Like, if you think about the literal definition of harassment and targeting, this is what has been going on to this gentleman in Colorado for almost a decade now, where routinely people will come in and ask him to make these bizarre cakes for two men getting married, or like trans people or something like that, knowing that he won't do it because, he is against his religion, and all of a sudden they're just attacking him. We've seen a lot of attacking of religion in the workplace, to the point where religion has become political. You also have, different, like, corporations promoting a religious bent, Hobby Lobby and different things like that have been under attack in society lately. So there's been a lot of that. And with attacking the God, the next thing you attack is the Father. Because spiritually, the Father is the closest to God on earth. So you'll have almost a complete destruction of the Father. It's not just, in the previous video, I talked about how the Father is turned into a fictionalized oaf, the Homer Simpsonization of the Father, or turning the dad into an angry drunk or whatever. In the modern world, you're taught heterophobia, essentially, and this is going to encompass everything that has to do with sex. So you're going to talk about the relationship between men and women, but the specifics when it comes to the Father is that you're taught that the Father doesn't really matter. That, your life is just fine if you didn't have a dad. You don't lose anything in society if you didn't have a father, because the welfare state will take care of it. Or, your mom will have other boyfriends, or your mom has a female best friend who could take care of you. And, you get this, it takes a village, quote unquote, mentality that comes from Black Lives Matter, but we'll get to Black Lives Matter later. But you have this concept where fathers aren't important. Only thing that's important when it comes to fathers is their money. So you'll often see, oh yeah, a guy is heaved with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in child support, but he has no rights as far as when he gets to see his kid and how long and all that type of stuff. He has no rights. The concept of father's rights in the United States, especially, has been completely destroyed. There is almost no concept of father's rights. Some guys spend so much money trying to fight these women in the courts that they end up bankrupting themselves. Hell, some go bankrupt anyway because they, especially in a divorce situation where the woman gets everything, she gets the house, and now he has to pay alimony on the house, or he has to give up child support so that she could take care of the house. He loses, he has to take care of two different households, his own and hers. It's very difficult for him to survive in that situation. He's inevitably going to fall behind. And in that situation, when you fall behind on child support, you can go to jail. So you create this debtor's prison. If we're being honest, when it comes to men, you have literal debt prisons where, and that's the hood. I said this in a previous video. The hood is nothing but the product of debt prisons. All of these guys walking around here can't afford child support, and they're on child support. And so they're in and out of jail. They can't keep a job. They're in and out of jail. What can they do? They have no rights, and sometimes in the extremes, and I'll say this, it's in the extremes sometimes, but it happens more often in certain countries where you're not even allowed to contest whether you are the father of that child, because you're not allowed to get a DNA test. So you're not allowed to test the child because the child, for some reason, even though it's a completely separate entity, is considered in the custody of the mom. So you can't DNA test the child. Even though she says the child is yours, even though you're paying legally for the child, you can't DNA test the child. There's been situations where women have taken the child and left. My friends were telling me about that. Women will just take a child and leave the state, leave the city, disappear, vanish. And it's not a kidnapping charge. Like if you would have taken the child and disappeared, you get hit with a kidnapping charge. But, but you're taught over and over again that there's masculine privilege, there's male privilege, and that, you have to overcome these things. But that's subversion of the father, where you're better off you're teaching children that you're better off without dads. Now, the truth of this is, well, let's talk about something else, which is domestic violence, because this is another thing that they tell you, because, you're better off without a man in the house because men beat women. And women get beaten so badly by men and raped and all this sort of thing. But when you tell that's not a factual statement. For starters, in the United States, there are two relationships that are more violent than men beating women. One is a single parent home, where there's tons of violence in a single parent home, where children are routinely abused by single mothers, especially male children. They are routinely beaten by single mothers. The problem with this is that is not considered domestic violence. That's considered child abuse, right? So if you look up domestic violence, even though the word domestic means violence in the home, it will tell you, oh, it's just men beating women. But that's not even the case, because women beating children is the most violent relationship in the United States, probably in the world. And after women beating children is gay women fighting each other. So really the most violent relationships in the country are relationships where there are no men. So if there is not a man present, then you're actually going to have more violence, because, and then in some situations, and I can't say this for sure, but it seems to be the case, that men are actually the victims of violence more than women are. A man is taught to be stoic, to accept that a woman smacked him, punched him, she threatened to kill him, she threw bricks through his window, all these different things, she keyed his car. He is, absorbing all this violence from this woman, and he just has to absorb it. He just kind of has to take it, because, you're a snitch if you tell on her, you're weak if you can't control her. So she gets to do all this crazy stuff. And then also, a woman can stalk a man, threaten to kill him, all this sort of stuff, and it's not taken as seriously in the courts, as opposed to if it was the other way around. Like, there's a lot of situations where, if a man had smacked a woman, she can run to the court and get a restraining order and everything, but a man can't do the same thing, So you have a subversion of the masculine and the feminine, but that's a little bit later. We're talking about now the emasculation of the father, and you also have the sort of dissolution of the wife, where they try to teach the wife to be this is the masculinization of the female, that she should want to have multiple sex partners and engage in polyamory and different things, where that sort of dissolve the family and dissolve the family trust. Where the concept is supposed to be, they're trying to have both feet get everything that you want, because that's what feminism is all about, is that women can have everything they want. You can have a husband who take care of you, but you should also be able to fuck your boss, the gardener, your neighbors, everyone else, and then on your husband's dime. Like, your husband's supposed to pay you to do all this stuff. And sometimes you'll have the situation, and sometimes it's the reverse, where it's the man forcing a woman into these sorts of things, where into multiple sex partners, where you have quote unquote open relationships. And, you know, like, these things are usually only beneficial to one party. When you have the quote unquote open relationship, it's usually because one party can get laid and the other one can't, you know, and it's usually the woman, if we're being honest, because it's very, very easy for women to have sex. You know, they really just have to put themselves out there and the men will come, you know, because we live in a society where there's very few men who are having sex and very few men who are sexually active or even interested in sex anymore, because of the sexual harassment industry that has been created by the heterophobes. So every time a man wants to have sex with a woman or interested in a woman, he has to go through these layers and layers of bureaucracy about whether he's asked her out more than once. What used to be called persistent is now called harassment. You know, you used to ask out this girl because she was cute. You asked her out 2 or 3 times, and she finally like, okay, I'll go out with you. Now it's like you asked her out 2 or 3 times, you harassed her into going out. You coerced her, you stalked her, or whatever the case may be. Because that's just a reframing of the same situation. You know, what used to be a consensual sexual encounter through, you know, bizarre questioning and probing by third parties, usually, especially on college campuses, it's usually some administrator or some activist. They turn what was consensual sex into rape. So that's how you live in a rape culture. Everybody was raped because, well, I was a little bit drunk. Oh, if you was drunk, you couldn't consent, you know. And it was like, damn. But of course, the man doesn't get that same credit. If he was drunk, then that's just too bad. He was drunk. He's a man, so it doesn't matter. But so you have this subversion of sex where they try to teach everybody that they need to just have wanton sex all over the place. And of course, this spreads a lot of disease and leads to a lot of degeneracy, especially like part of why there's so much HIV and AIDS in the gay community is because there's so much free sex in the gay community. Like monogamy and heterosexual community, especially in, well, let's be more specific, into the male homosexual community. There's a lot of AIDS and HIV and different diseases because a lot of them are some of them are having sex with guys who are quote unquote straight, and they're leaving secondary lives or whatever, having sex with men on the side, and, you know, they're just sleeping around with one another, spreading disease. And in the heterosexual community, you have people sleeping around, creating baby mamas and baby daddies. And you still do have that concept of spreading disease. But the biggest fixture that you see is broken families, you know, and a huge upswing in the last 40 or 50 years in cheating especially with women. You know, women have taken up cheating a lot. And then you'll see in the media that you're supposed to just accept that your wife cheats on you or your girlfriend cheats on you. And in some cases, even in the extremes, they will say, well, she's a better wife after she has an affair because, you know, she'll probably feel guilty into doing more for you. Or, you know, your confidence in that she is going to go out and have sex with somebody else and come home is sexy. You know, that's sexy confidence. And you'll see this destruction, this horrible, evil shit that they dump on, especially onto young people. It's disgusting. Like, you'll see Teen Vogue. And this is kind of when you come to the stealing the innocence of children, which is also part of dissolving the family, is you'll turn the child against the parents. And you'll do that by creating different values in the child than exist in the child's home. So they started doing this really early. You'll hear the stories about how the Catholic schoolgirls are the wildest, you know, because they've been become completely degenerate in like high school and in college when they get inundated with other values. You know, they start getting told like you can go out and have tons of sex and do whatever you want. And, you know, so they go out and they do it. And then, of course, they don't feel so great afterwards, you know, because it's just not how they're built. Girls are not built like boys. You know, boys are built for utility, for doing different things like that. Women are not built for utility, but that's, you know, a labor thing as well. But when you create different values in the child, and then you lionize the child, this is where you get the situation where you get these child activists in schools, like the Greta Thunbergs of the world. These children who don't know anything that wasn't fed to them by the closest adults, and then they go on the lecture circuit telling full-grown adults what they should and shouldn't be doing. You know, there's some of that too on the right wing, where you have, like, I forget what the kid's real last name is. I think it's Pearson, C.J. Pearson, a young black Republican or whatever. And he's been on the internet since he was like 12 years old, preaching being a black Republican. And it's like, no, he's a kid. He should just be doing kid stuff. Go play basketball. Go play video games. You don't know that much about the world. Even though he may sound smart, he doesn't know that much about the world. You know, so you can't take life advice from children, you know. And I know that's a Christian concept, like from the mouth of babes. It's like, you have to realize that unless this kid is like some Mensa level in intellect, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. He has no real life experience. And it's the same thing with the whole Greta Thunberg thing, is it's telling these children that the world is going to end, and to turn them into environmentalists, you know, turning them into Black Lives Matter activists, turning them into different activists for different organizations, illegal immigrants and all that type of stuff. They're doing that directly through the schools now. You know, they've been incentivizing that sort of stuff in schools through scholarships, and now they're just saying, hey, you just have to do it in order to graduate in, like, California. You know, so they have turned the children into, they have stolen their innocence. There is no innocence in children anymore. And you have all these movies like Cuties and stuff like that, that is trying to teach people that, oh, your child is a sexual being at 11. It's like, no, there should be no sexual beings at 11. You're a child, you know. But these people who think that children are, you know, it's all about destroying the innocence of the child, you know. And it begins with taking the family out of the home. Anybody who might instill in this child any type of values has to be corrupted, whether that's the mother or the father. You know, you have to corrupt whichever one it is. And then the child is open to, you know, suggestion from outside parties. And this is kind of when you, in young boys, this is where you get gangs and stuff like that, right? Because if he can't work and he has no dad, he's going to, and especially if he doesn't have any, like an older uncle or older cousin who takes interest in him, the moment he goes outside and he sees like the dope man, and the dope man doesn't really like him, he just sees him as a way to be useful to him, it's going to turn him into the kind of man that he is, which is going to be, you know, somebody who lays around, drinks and smokes and parties and sleeps around with a bunch of kids by different women and all that type of stuff. It's opening your child up to being poisoned by outside parties when you allow your family to fight within each other. It's just a situation that you create, but people allow it for years and years and years. We have allowed people to have access to our children and to teach our children values that are different from us. You know, teaching your children different values in these schools. Like, that's just kind of how it is, man. Schools are not for that. So, of course, then you have the masculinity and femininity. After you sort of dissolved the sex concept, and you, of course, the family doesn't really exist anymore. Now you begin to drill in, and you begin to say, okay, what you think is masculine behavior is changing. What you think is feminine behavior is changing. And basically what they'll do is they'll just force femininity onto boys. And if you're not a feminine boy, they're going to pump you full of pills. That's usually your two options. You know, make your boy as effeminate as possible, or pump your boy full of pills, you know, because he's got ADHD, you know, and stuff like that. Not just that his testosterone is peaking and he's, you know, acting up because he's got, you know, high testosterone. He needs like a healthy outlet to go and do something, but that he's some sort of defective girl. And that's kind of always been the way that they've been looking at boys. You know, I won't say always, but how they looked at boys the last 30 or 40 years is as defective girls. Girls are the new standard. Girls sit still for a long time. They're very obedient in some cases. Boys are not. And boys are hard-headed. They want to get into stuff. They want to go out and explore. And you need pills to sit down. So that prevents you from being a masculinized boy. So you'll see a lot of pills and stuff like that dumped onto little boys. Or they'll do something where they'll make your boy effeminate. They'll, like, I didn't know that there was a big thing like this until recently, but there's a lot of young boys that they are being pushed into being a makeup artist. Like, I didn't know it until recently that there was a 17-year-old makeup artist, young boy who wore makeup, who committed suicide, and he was homosexual. And there's like a huge community of young boys that are into, or I don't know if they're into it naturally, or if they're incentivized into being into it, or they're forced into it by their moms and parents and stuff like that, that are into makeup, you know, that are into being effeminate. The child drag queens, like Desmond is Amazing. There's another one. Kid became a multimillionaire by, you know, stripping in gay clubs, and, you know, being involved with like the gay pride parades. And I'm not sure if she had a TV show. I'm pretty sure there was another boy that, you know, the trans girl or whatever the hell, I Am Jazz, who was given millions of dollars to be on TV to show people, oh yeah, well, boys can be good girls, you know, and that sort of stuff is being pushed on boys constantly. Now, when it comes to masculinizing girls, they don't really, sometimes it's not as obvious, but when you look at what they do with girls, they try to force girls into masculinized competitive behaviors. So they'll teach girls to be confrontational, you know, that a girl should quote unquote, stand up for herself. But really what that means is that she is supposed to go and begin a conflict. You know, like, it's one thing to teach people to stand up for themselves. Like, that's 100% fine. But when you teach people that they have to go out and create conflict, which is usually what they do with girls, is, you know, to, you know, stand up and to hit boys, and sometimes, in some cases, to start fights because, you know, you're just as good as a boy, you're just as strong, you're just as fast, you're just as this, you're just as that. You're teaching them to be competitive with boys. And it turns boys from somebody that you might like into, you know, somebody that you might like, you want to spend some time with, into a competitor. You're a competitor. You're competing for resources. You're competing for jobs. You're competing for everything. And that's really what they've done to masculinize girls, is they've turned girls into a weapon in order to hurt boys. And they've done it, you know, they've been doing that for years. So I'm not going to say like it's too masculine for girls to want to play sports. I mean, girls can play sports. I don't have a problem with that. But when you start having wanting girls to do things like be in a fraternity, knowing that there's a sorority, but you want to be the first girl in the fraternity. You want to be the first girl on the football team or the first girl on the basketball team. And then you're not physically capable of making it. So you just go to the courts and say, oh, they're being discriminatory. They won't let me play. And then all of a sudden, some boy who made the team has to get off the team so the girl can get on there. You know, that's the problem. You know, they've been doing that in these colleges for a long time now, where they destroyed the concept of the fraternity. And they specifically targeted fraternities in like Harvard and Yale as spaces that need to be, quote unquote, diversified by forcing girls into them spaces. You know, it's not a thing that's separate but equal. As far as, okay, well, she can just go to her sorority. No, she has to be in a fraternity because we need a girl to keep her eye on all these boys who they're going through here and trying to figure out how to rape all these girls. But they're just trying to turn the women into phallic women rather, which is like female warriors. You know, all of these female police officers and female security guards and female soldiers. I was told something that was specifically, I thought was funny. A couple of years ago, and they said to me, if you see a female security guard, please believe that there's nothing in there worth stealing. That if anybody puts something behind a female security guard, there's nothing worth stealing. And you also see like a lot of shootings, like police officer shootings, are female officers who are doing the shootings, and also impotent male officers, because impotence in men is also forced. You know, again, I talked about heterophobia, where if you take a step towards a woman, you will get smacked down, and you're not supposed to be interested in women sexually. You're not supposed to be an aggressive man. You're supposed to be a eunuch. You know, you're not interested in sex. You eat your plain bologna sandwich and you drink your plain water. You're not supposed to eat meat. You're not, so eating bologna is already a problem. You know, you're a you know, sexless male and a sexless female. They try to turn both of you into brown paper bags, if you want to be honest. And where you just have no character, no personality, you're all uniform. It's like, it's not going to work. But turning women into phallic, you know, into phallic women who want to go out and be soldiers and police officers and everything, knowing that they are at a physical disadvantage, is part of the masculinization of women, you know. And yes, it might be because it's a good job, but you also put people's lives in danger. You know, female firefighters and stuff like that put people's lives in danger because you don't want to tell the truth. You know, that, you know, a woman probably is 5'6", 5'8". She probably shouldn't be trying to carry anybody to safety or something like that. Now, there are some situations where a female cop does great things, like the female cop who got shot in Compton. She got shot in the face, and she was still able to keep her partner alive. Like, that's a good thing. But I'm not under any circumstances that her femaleness had anything to do with that, other than the fact that she wasn't killed. And, you know, there are other men officers who probably would have done the same thing. But when you have these female officers, they can't restrain a man, so they get fought off. Like, you see videos all the time of female police officers just basically being thrown around and having to resort to pulling a gun, you know. And men do it too, because again, like I said, you have a lot of impotent men that they're not taught to do things like stay in shape. They have these jobs where they can sit around all day and not be, if you work in a combative job, you know, like a police officer, like in the military, it behooves you to stay in shape, because you might have to fight somebody. You might have to physically combat people, but it's not required to be a police officer or to be anything else, security guard, to stay in any type of shape. So now you have all these fat security guards who don't do anything except start fights. And, you know, they may have a weapon, they may have mace or a baton or something like that. And that becomes the situation where, you know, it's a problem. And it's a problem for society in general, that you don't have people who don't know their role in society. And I'm not saying that, you know, people are designated to certain things, that a man should always be cut like a Greek god. I mean, I'm not. But when it comes to being a security guard, I think you should have a certain level of strength and a certain level of restraint. And it's not something that a woman typically has. So, and, you know, you also have this eunuch male who, you know, when he gets a little bit of power, he loses his mind, because the only thing he can have control over is other men. He's not allowed to have any control over women. So, you know, none of these things matter. But after, you know, your sexuality, your masculinity, your femininity, the next thing they go after is your race. So me being black, I have to deal with the whole coon card, the Uncle Tom card, that if you talk a certain way, you think a certain way, you're acting white, you're thinking white. Whiteness is being on time. Whiteness is, you know, not thinking racially is whiteness. That's when you fall into the Black Lives Matter group, your Pan-African groups, where you have to believe that you're this poor, put upon, oppressed individual. And, you know, they take ownership of your race. And that's really what this cultural vandalism is these people are taking ownership of these different pillars. They're taking ownership of your religion by saying that your religion is discriminatory against gays. So it needs to either go away or it needs to be more inclusive. So you need to just, if homosexuality is a sin, you have to ignore that part and accept the homosexuality anyway. The same thing with the family. The family is exclusionary. That it's just mother, son, children, mother, husband, children. Like, no, you're not allowed to do that, because you might gain some type of power and some type of moral authority. You might be autonomous. You might not want to be a part of the state. You might just want to go out on the middle of nowhere and live in the countryside. We can't have that. We need you to integrate into our society. So you're not allowed to have a family, which means we have to destroy the father, we have to destroy the mother, we have to destroy the children. And it's the same thing with the sexuality. If you're a sexual being, you could be autonomous, you know, and we can't have that. You have to be part of the sexual collective. So we push in orgies and polyamory and all these different things upon people. Random sexuality. Masculinity and femininity is another thing. We can't have exclusionary concepts. We have to, you know, we have to break those down so that everybody can be anything that they want, which of course destroys the concept of whether these things exist or not. And now it's the same thing with race, where now you have race as a social construct, quote unquote. where, you know, anybody can be black. You know, so Sean King is black, even though his skin is literally white. His hands, his face, everything is literally white. Or his feet is like pink and his hands are pink. You know, if you didn't know the difference between him and Tucker Carlson, there really is no difference as far as, you know, how they look and how they come across. And you have a lot of, recently there was another college professor that came out and said that she has been pretending to be black for 30 some odd years, and she's a professor of Africana studies, and she, you know, she's a Jewish woman, and she's been pretending to be black for all these decades, and she's been winning awards and different things like that. And, you know, of course, the Rachel Dolezals, where, you know, another white person that pretends to be black. And these people do it because there's some type of benefit to being black. Like, when you talk about the days of lynching and they're just killing black people just to kill them, nobody's pretending to be black. If anything, there was the opposite. There's, if you had light skin, you were pretending to be white to get out of this situation. But now in today's world, you have the Indian guy who shaves his head and pretends to be a Tyrone from the hood because he wants to get into college on an affirmative action. That's real. That really happened. You know, there was a really Indian student who shaved his head because Indians have very fine hair. And I'm talking red dot Indian. He shaved his head so that he could go to college as a black boy and, you know, under an affirmative action credit. In order to, he just checked the box that he was black. And as a melanated Indian, nobody knew the difference, you know, and that's subverting the race, you know, that you have to be black in order to have these benefits, that being black comes with all these benefits. But if you say that, you know, black people are equal to whites, we don't need all these benefits, then all of a sudden, then, oh my God, you're Uncle Tom, you're a coon, you're all this stuff. You know, if you say black people have to correct all of these problems that I just talked about, and they have to fix these problems, you have to clean up all this vandalism out of your neighborhoods, and, you know, correct your relationship with religion, correct your relationship with family, correct your relationship with your children, and all this type of stuff. Oh no, you're a fascist, you're an Uncle Tom, you know, that's not going to do anything for you. And so they basically tell you that if you're Hispanic, all you should care about is illegal immigrants. If you're Asian, it's okay to discriminate against you, and that you deserve discrimination if you're an Asian, because there's so many smart Asians that it's unfair to all the darkies, you know, all the blacks, that, you know, you're Asian and you have a family and you have all this stuff, you have tradition and all these sorts of things. How dare you? How absolutely dare you? You have to get rid of that stuff. You have to, you have white privilege if you're Asian now. You know, you're a white supremacist if you're a Jew now. Nothing matters. Race doesn't matter anymore. What you actually are does not matter. What matters is what you, is whether you toe the line, and you toe what the racial line is, what the religious line is, what the ethnic line is. If you're a Hispanic that does not buy into illegal immigration, you're self-hating wetback. If you're, you know, a Jewish person who doesn't think that we should be giving billions of dollars of money to Israel, you're a self-hating Jew. If you're a black person that doesn't believe in reparations, you're an Uncle Tom, you're a coon. You know, and we see this stuff over and over and over again. And this is what we spend most of our time talking about, because this is what most of the media is now, is people talking about each other's skin colors and, you know, white privilege and all this type of crap. But it's not really necessary. But after they destroyed your race, then they go to your individuality, whatever you think you are. If you think you're a self-made person, that you want to work hard, that you want to go out and earn a living, you want to go out and earn a job, you want to go get educated, all this sort of stuff, they start pushing this merit is a myth phenomenon onto people. And what merit is a myth means is that you didn't really work for anything, that everything was given to you by society, that, you know, wealth is distributed, quote unquote, that wealth is not created, it is distributed. Jobs are not created, they are distributed. Now, it is true that somebody has to give you a job. If you become the vice president of sales at some place, sure, somebody had to actually hire you. But now, what you actually did to earn that job, as far as your resume, your cover letters, your performance in the interviews, your education, your experience, all that type of stuff, none of that matters, because that's merit, right? What they'll say is merit is a myth. They'll say that merit is a trap, merit is a lie. There's no such thing as earning money. There's no such thing as earning a job. How do you earn that? How do you earn that? You know, it's created by your society. Everything is created by society. So society has to take credit for it, which also means by definition that you owe society something. So in the concept of merit is a myth is baked in socialism. You know, it is the concept of you became very successful because society provided you with mailboxes and roads and traffic lights and police and firefighters and teachers and clean air and clean water and all these things that, you know, all these other people also enjoy who didn't become a success. All these other people enjoy the same stuff. You came from, you were the rose that grew from concrete and became something greater than, but you're owed now the society, you owe society something. So we have to be able to take all this money and tax money from you, which is basically theft. And but a way of saying that, it's not theft is that saying that you owe us, you have to give back to the society who gave you so much, even though society, you give back to society is how you became rich in the first place. You know, to give you one of the fine examples is Jeff Bezos. Like I've seen people who are flat out socialists, and then I've seen people who are just anti-capitalist, which could be just be a Catholic. They'll say something like, you know, how is Jeff Bezos making so much money? You know, and he ships his packages through the mail. And it's like the mail existed before Amazon did. You're like, it's not like he's taking advantage of the mail. Poshmark takes advantage of the mail because they have free packaging and all that type of stuff. But Amazon has enough money at this point to run their own delivery service if they really wanted to. And then there's also third-party delivery like UPS and FedEx and all that type of stuff. And they also go through Amazon sometimes. But they'll say that because they don't want anybody to believe that you can do anything on your own. You know, you're not allowed to think that you can do things yourself. You know, because if you think you can do things yourself, then you're no longer dependent on the state. And the state is what they want you to be dependent upon. They want you on welfare. They want you on a HUD house because then they can control it. They can control your house. If, you know, if it's a state house, they can throw people out. You know, if it's welfare, they can throw you off of it. You know, if you're on that government dime, they can always just take it away if you don't want to do what they want you to do. You don't want to get that vaccine? Well, we could take your HUD house. You don't want to send your kids to a public school? We can cut off your welfare. You know, once they can punish you for doing things, you're not incentivized to do it. You're coerced into doing it. You know, like one of the things to double back a little bit, you have a situation now where a woman can have a lot of sex with a lot of different people, not know who the father of her child is, but she has to put some guy on child support in order to get welfare. You know, in order for her to get welfare, she has to have some guy on record as the father of this child. And of course, like I said, it might be a situation where he can't even dispute that. You know, he's not allowed to have access to the child, so he's not allowed to even DNA test the child. So you have these situations where they're trying to force dependence upon you, and they do that by destroying your individuality and your individual spirit. You're not, you know, anything that you say can work for them. Like, oh, if you learn stocks and bonds, and if you learn how to invest, if you learn how to, you know, learn a skill, they'll turn around and say, nope, none of that matters. None of that matters. You're not allowed to do any of that stuff. You know, don't tell people how to take care of themselves. Tell people how to beg the government for money. Tell people about how to, you know, reparations and all this sort of stuff. You know, not getting it out the mud, which is a hustler's ethos, which everybody has. You know, just about everybody, no matter what country, they have the ethos of, you know, I'm not going to sit here and just be poor. I want to go out and try to find my way. But the more avenues that are open to them, the better it is. And what makes a poor country poor is the closing of these avenues, that you're not allowed to do this, and this, because the government controls it or the government wants to do it on your behalf. And in our society, that's why people say small government. The government should do less, not more. And, but it's kind of a strange Ouroboros situation, because not only do they want you dependent upon the state, but then they will go and vandalize the state. So then it will say you get into these arguments about people like after they've try to destroy your individuality and vandalize your individuality, that everything you did is provided by society, then they'll attack society. This is where you get your 1619 project, your critical race theory, and all this type of stuff, right? The 1619 project by Hannah Nicole Jones, or Nicole Hannah Jones, I forget how her name goes, but it says that the United States should have been the real founding of the United States should be in 1619, when the 400 slaves were brought to United States by the British, I believe, the English. And then, that should be the real founding of the United States, and that the Americas were founded on slavery and racism, and not the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, but on the mere concept of slavery, which they created, and capitalism is white supremacy, and capitalism is whiteness, and it doesn't work for people of color. Socialism is the natural thing for people of color, and all this crap, right? Now, not only that is stuff that you're not allowed to question, like the moment it was written down, it became almost like written in stone. It was almost like, the 10 Commandments. Whiteness, anti-capitalism is being produced by capitalist agencies. Like Lululemon and Apple and Microsoft is like decolonized capitalism. It's like, what are you talking about? But the argument doesn't even make sense from the beginning, because, well, postmodernism, that's, critical race theory, all that type of stuff. We'll get to that in 1 second. But the 1619 project is problematic in and of itself, because it doesn't deal with people who have written before it even happened, that the 400 slaves, quote unquote, that supposedly came to the United States. Well, Benjamin Quarles, in the Negro in the Making of America, he claims that they weren't slaves at all, that they were actually indentured servants, that these 400 individuals had been baptized in England, and that according to English law, a Christian cannot make a slave of another Christian. And since these Africans had been baptized, they were actually Christians. And therefore, when they were brought to the Americas, they were brought to the Americas as indentured servants, which is an individual who works out a specific amount of time. So you may be an indentured servant for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or whatever. And then you're free. So that would make them not slaves. But I haven't seen anything, but that sort of thinking that maybe these people weren't even slaves in the first place is not challenged. Like you're not allowed to say that these people might not have been slaves in the first place. People get so caught up into the everything is based on race, and the Civil War was fought for slavery and all these sorts of things. They get so bogged down in that sometimes there are people have already made the argument. Like Benjamin Quarles has been dead for years. He wrote that the Negro in the Making of America a long time ago, long before the 1619 project came along. And then you'll have another thing where they'll say the America's financial success has been based off slavery. It's like, well, then why aren't other countries financially successful, even though they still have slavery? There's still slavery in Arab countries. There's still slavery in Africa. Those are not rich countries. It's completely, it ignores all the efforts of the Industrial Revolution. They completely ignore all of that stuff. It goes straight from slavery to Jim Crow, to redlining and all this type of stuff. It's completely deconstructing the history of your country, telling people false information. It's disinformation, it's not misinformation. A lot of it is disinformation. It is straight up falsehoods. And you're taught that from the beginning, that, you're wrong, if you believed that your country was, and look, nobody's country is perfect, but some countries were founded on certain values and certain beliefs. And the United States is one of those countries that is founded on certain values and beliefs. And they didn't always live up to it. And yes, they were hypocrites. But, they can be hypocrites, but what they wrote down was what they believed. People have inalienable rights. And it took us a long time to get to this point, but you have most of the inalienable rights. And now what we're doing is we're getting rid of inalienable rights. So now you have people who are using the First Amendment to take away the First Amendment. They're using the government to take away your Second Amendment rights, your Fifth Amendment rights, your 14th Amendment rights. Like the 14th Amendment is what black people always wanted, which is equal opportunity under the law and equal representation under the law. That's what the 14th Amendment is. But then the same people who wanted that, the 14th Amendment, turned around and said, oh, well, we want affirmative action laws. And now we want a constitutional anti-racist amendment. It's like none of this stuff makes sense because it's an Ouroboros, ultimately, because postmodernism is created by colonial thinking. And it's created by the French. So I forget what his name is, but Foucault and Derrida, these are French philosophers. And they'll say that you need to decolonize your thinking because capitalism is whiteness. Everything that you think is the nuclear family is whiteness. Monogamy is whiteness. All these sorts of things are whiteness. And they use postmodernism to create this concept. And what they'll do is they'll use whiteness to talk about decolonizing whiteness. Because what do you think French is? French is white. French colonized Vietnam. They colonized certain parts of Africa, certain parts of the United States, certain parts of different countries. Haiti is another one. And they took what those people thought, and then they take it into something else, and they put some sprinkles on it, called it critical race theory. And all of a sudden, it's supposed to be something brand new. It's like, no, it's not. It's the same garbage that it was before, you know, just dressed up with black skin. You put somebody who wears an ankh, you know, or, you know, they got seashells in their hair, and all of a sudden they're saying the same thing that, you know, this white dude has created, and all of a sudden it's supposed to be different. It's like, no, it's not. But they destroyed everything from your religion to your individuality, to your sexuality, to your race. Everything has been spray painted in ugly colors and made to look exclusionary, and it needs to be diversified. So you need to be forced into doing things. And it's all like, what's the purpose of all this stuff? Like, what's the grand narrative of all this? The grand narrative of it is to subvert everything that you are and everything that you might want to become to the state, you know, and then to destroy the state. Like, once you become dependent upon the state, and the state controls everything that you like, your race, your sexuality, everything, and then they can control the state. That's the point. It's like to control you through the government. And if they can't get that power, what they can do is make you feel bad about it and make it ugly and make you, you know, because they haven't gotten that power yet. So it's like when you walk down the street and you see like that the pitchforks and the 6-point star, and you see the ugliness of the hood where you have spray paint everywhere, and they're spray painting crap all in graffiti all over these buildings. And you're like, wow, it's kind of demoralizing in a certain way, because they're tagging, the gangs are tagging their territory. That's what they do through the media, is you'll see people really just tagging their territory that, you know, like I said, men are oafs, you know, that you don't need a father. You don't need, you know, you don't need to be a monogamous woman. You don't need a man at all these sorts of things. But I've been talking long enough, man. Hopefully you guys see my overall theme, my overall picture. But like this video, share the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you guys later.